Well, Kieran, thank you for that very kind introduction. It's great to be here. When I was invited to be keynote speaker, I asked, well, what would you like me to talk about? And I was told, well, talk about your career and talk about how your education contributed to your career. It was also, I have to say, suggested to me in the nicest possible way that I don't go on too long. So I have to distill a few words of wisdom on that large topic in a rather short amount of time. In any event, Kieran has saved me a bit in terms of talking about my career because he's given you a synopsis there. Straight after I left UCD, I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs. I have been, let me say, over 40 years in the department. The last 20 of these years as ambassador in those 5 posts that Kieran mentioned. And I'm regularly asked, well, which of your ambassadorial assignments did you like best? And it's not because I'm being coy or diplomatic, but I have to say it's very difficult in a single word to define which I liked best because they have all been such different posts. The UN jobs, obviously, in Geneva and in New York, they're wonderful posts. Apart from appealing to your head, they appeal to your heart and your conscience and your ideals. The UN undoubtedly is a flawed organization, but it still does enormously important work in areas like development and disarmament, human rights, humanitarian, such important areas, and all of them areas where Ireland has a strong profile. The job in Brussels is kind of sui generis. It's a very, very intense job. The negotiations that you're doing there really matter. They have very real implications financially and legislatively back at home. It's not a place for dilettantes. Sometimes people ask me, well, did you like Brussels? And I find I have to stop and think, well, at Brussels, I hardly knew it. It was a vague backdrop to where I worked for 4 years. So very, very intense job. Then on to Paris, obviously the most beautiful city in the world, at least in my view. Gorgeous residence there. But the job is certainly not all glamour. It is a job that involves overseeing the bilateral interests between the two countries, and also a very important dimension is looking to our common membership of the European Union. Some issues we are in partnership with France, like the defence of the common agricultural policy, for example. Other areas like rates of corporate tax and how we set corporate tax in Europe, we are diametrically opposed to the French. So a lot of real substance in that job. My current job, of course, it has to be one of the best jobs in the whole world. I don't need to give any of you a description of the content of the job. Huge people-to-people relations, almost 35 million Americans of Irish descent. Very important economic, contemporary relations. The biggest source of our foreign direct investment, well over 70% of it comes from the United States. Our biggest market for export of goods, our second biggest tourism market. All of those metrics, and most of you probably are fairly familiar with them, but it truly is a terrific job. But I have to say the aspect of the invitation that intrigued me a bit was the suggestion that I reflect a little bit about what my education contributed to my career. It's not something I think about every day of the week, but as I sat in the train this afternoon coming up from DC, I had a little bit of time to reflect. And I thought I'd share in a fairly personal way some of my own experiences. Let me say first what I did study in UCD. As Kieran said, I escaped from the business world. I wasn't part of that. My degree was in history and political science. Subsequently, I did, in the evening while I was in the department, I did a diploma in legal studies in the King's Inns, but my full-time study was at UCD, as I said, graduating with a history and political science degree. So just a few things, rather general, but ones that really, to me, are lessons that I take from my education in general and particularly at UCD. The first thing I would say is a decent education will take you practically anywhere. And by a decent education, I want to define that in very general terms. To me, it means the ability to think analytically, to bring a clear-eyed and logical perspective to whatever it is you're analysing, to be able to sift and define the important and the issues of secondary importance, to be able to express yourself with the degree of lucidity, whether it's in writing or in oral expression. To me, that is what defines a well-educated person. And many of you, I looked at the list of where you work and so on. I'm sure you've moved around from organisation to organisation. For me, it was somewhat different. As you heard, I have been my whole adult life in the Department of Foreign Affairs, but with jobs that were radically different. And over the course of the 40 years or so, I guess I've done about 10 or 12 very different jobs, drawing on different skill sets. But I found my skills were very transferable, whether it was engaging in the minutiae of a disarmament negotiation or dealing with all of those arcane issues that you're legislating for night and day in Brussels, or as I am now involved in some of the detail of immigration legislation, or speaking to business about, again, fairly arcane issues like data privacy and safe harbour and all of that. It is absolutely possible to transfer your skills. If you have a decent education, you can apply it across almost any area. I mean, obviously, of course, I'm not passing myself off as an accountant or a nuclear physicist or anything like that. But the skills are extraordinarily transferable. So in my view, and my motto is, never allow yourself be intellectually intimidated, never allow yourself be pigeonholed. Have confidence. If you can think clearly and you can communicate in a cogent way, then you can do almost any job. So that's my first lesson that I draw. Second thing I would like to say is this. It's so important to find an environment where you feel at home. And in my own case, and I really don't say this out of courtesy to UCD or with nostalgia or a rosy glow in retrospective contemplation, I truly did feel at home in UCD from the time I arrived there. Now, I think my circumstances were a little bit unusual. My father was a psychiatric nurse, and that meant we moved around the country a great deal. So I had 3 different primary schools and 2 different secondary schools, and I always seemed to be the newcomer, and of course it was great to arrive in UCD where we were all newcomers together. But truly it was much more than that. I really felt from the time I arrived there in the arts faculty in UCD that I was in a community of people with a real passion for learning, where knowledge was valued for its own sake. And I felt it was a place where I could breathe and grow. Again, I think my circumstances were probably a little bit unusual. It wouldn't happen nowadays. But the first secondary school that I went to in Ireland, it was rather small, all girls convent school. There were 15 of us in the class. The other 14 girls left school after the intercert. Nobody was interested in going on to do a leaving cert, let alone go to university. Everybody went to secretarial and typing courses and so on. So I was definitely the official nerd in the class. I had studied Latin by myself for 3 years and so on. So especially conditioned by that background, you can imagine how it felt to come to UCD when you were in a community of like-minded people. I found it extraordinarily liberating. When I joined the department, again, I was so lucky. I found myself in a community of like-minded people with a sense of mission, a sense of public service. Of course, we weren't and aren't and shouldn't be all clones of each other. We're different in many ways, but that there is an essential sense of community there. And had that not existed in the department, I assure you, I would not have lasted 40 years there. So again, finding an environment where you feel at home is just so important. And the third and last thing I would touch on, and it's a bit related, but it's about finding what fits, finding the subject matter and the issues that you really want to engage with. And again, if I just draw on my own experience in UCD when I arrived and enlisted, at that time at least, I'm not sure if nowadays, but you still had about 3 weeks to change your mind after you enrolled. So I went, a very starry-eyed 17-year-old, absolutely clear in my head that I wanted to study English and I wanted to study philosophy. As I lived through those first 3 weeks in UCD, I had a bit of an epiphany. I had really gone to philosophy because I was very excited about existentialism and so on. I found at that time that philosophy in UCD was much more Aquinas than Sartre. It wasn't to my taste, and so I wasn't enamored. I had wanted to study English because I loved poetry. And as I sat there in the classes listening to the analysis and the deconstruction, I actually found myself thinking, I will, in the future, if I continue, I may so overanalyze poetry that I won't actually hear it anymore. So in short, within a few weeks, I had bailed out of philosophy and English, and I had bailed into history and economics. My first year of economics, I absolutely adored macroeconomics. I neither liked nor was talented at microeconomics. So at the end of the first year, the only respectable way to bail out of economics was to bail into second year political science, which is what I did, which explains why I ended up with my history and political science degree, a degree that I was really, really happy with. And throughout the career in the department, it's not that you can choose your assignments. Clearly, the department chooses for you, but you have a certain flexibility to exercise your preferences. And for me, the question always has been, what fits? Because if you know what fits, you know what you're going to be good at. So that's the third, if you like, not necessarily a piece of wisdom, but what I want to impart to you this evening. So that's it. I hope I have more or less kept to my time frame. I want to say once more that UCD and my 3 short years at UCD were really transformative for me. It is a family that I always felt at home in, I still feel at home in, and I'm so glad to join all of you here this evening. Thank you all very much.